Speaker of the House Mike Johnson has survived his attempted ouster by Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. MTG and close ally Thomas Massie had accused Johnson of collaborating with Democrats to advance their priorities in terms of government funding and funding for Ukraine. Now, the battle may have been lost before it really began, as Johnson did receive the blessings from GOP de facto head Donald Trump.
There was clearly a push by media titan Rupert Murdoch to support Johnson, as well as Fox News was kind toward him, and the infamous New York Post published headlines such as Moscow Marjorie. The Hill's Mychael Schnell was there and can describe the scene and what this means for the House and GOP. Good to hear from you, Michael. What's going on?
Yeah, so it was that pretty resounding vote against ousting Speaker Mike Johnson yesterday, or rather in favor of blocking this removal resolution from hitting the floor for a vote. But, you know, to sort of describe what happened was this was the last vote series of the week, and there were about 8 to 10 votes that the House was set to vote on, set to hold, including things like FAA reauthorization, a short-term extension, a bill that would add the citizenship question to the 10-year census. And then folks sort of got a bit suspicious because Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie were sitting at the table in front of the mics in the House chamber. And then once the first vote had ended, Congresswoman Greene asked to be recognized on the House floor. And it was at that moment that she brought this motion to vacate. Now, there were boos from both sides of the aisle in the chamber, Democrats and Republicans, and she ended up going through and reading this ouster resolution. It really took a lot of individuals by surprise because, remember, Congresswoman Greene filed this motion more than a month ago. Last week, she said she would force a vote on it this week, but we sort of got the indication in recent days that she was stepping back from that vow. She asked to meet with Speaker Johnson. They ended up holding 2 meetings that lasted for hours, and then she presented him with a series of demands, essentially saying, accept these and you won't face a motion to vacate. So sort of the vibe up on the Hill was that she wasn't going to go through with this, but then Marjorie Taylor Greene, in the middle of that vote series yesterday, triggering this motion to vacate, House GOP leadership immediately motioned to table that resolution. That table effort was successful in a resounding 359 to 43 to 7 vote. Just 10 Republicans joining Greene in voting against tabling that resolution. So guys, for now, the ouster threat is over, but Congresswoman Greene is, she's not taking off the table another ouster vote in the future. But as of right now, Johnson remains as Speaker.
What are we to make of a Republican House caucus that a little over a year ago was willing to hold vote after vote, removing the previous speaker, could not decide on a new one, raucous, chaotic, described that way, now falling in line for the most part behind Speaker Johnson? No more appetite for that sort of drama?
Well, just by the numbers, Robbie, there actually were more Republicans who voted against tabling this than voted in favor of ousting McCarthy back in October. And now let's remember that the folks who voted against tabling this resolution weren't necessarily going to vote to oust Kevin McCarthy. We heard that from a few individuals, Congressman Warren Davidson, for example, saying that he wanted to have the opportunity to weigh in on this, but he wasn't going to support it. But it wasn't really Republicans who were calling the shots this time around. It was Democrats, because we'll remember back in October, it was Democrats who decided to vote to oust Kevin McCarthy, which then made those 8 Republicans enough to oust him because of this slim majority. This time around, Democratic leadership came out and said, we are going to support a vote to table any resolution brought by Greene to oust Speaker Johnson, essentially saying that they didn't want to continue the chaos they didn't want a repeat of the chaos that had ensued back in October. They recognized that Johnson made good on his promise to move aid for Ukraine. But if Democrats once again sided with those rabble-rousers and voted against tabling this and then voted to oust Speaker Johnson, it very likely would have been enough to take him out of the top job. So Democrats were really calling the shots in this situation.
I mean, you spoke to this a little bit, but that is the question. Why now? Why when Kevin McCarthy was on the chopping block and went through a historically unprecedented number of rounds of votes trying to decide on a speaker, the Democrats not try to protect him, try to save him in exchange for various concessions, given that it does seem to be the case that McCarthy seemed, frankly, less conservative, less kind of MAGA sympathetic, or whatever, however you want to describe it, than Mike Johnson is.
Yeah, well, at the time, back in October, Democratic leadership had put out this statement essentially saying that these are A, B, and C reasons why we are going to vote to oust Speaker McCarthy. Essentially, they had argued that he hadn't kept his word on a few things. They argued, right before that vote, McCarthy had gone on national television and accused Democrats of almost plummeting the country into a government shutdown. That wasn't the case. It was Republicans who couldn't coalesce around some sort of continuing resolution. So they had their cadre of reasons, but this time around, essentially, the thought process was there were a few different reasonings for it. A, Democrats just didn't have an appetite to repeat the chaos that happened back in October. B, folks recognize that they are very close to an election year. The majority is very slim. There's no idea who would be the successor to Johnson. And C, a lot of it hinged on that aid for Ukraine, that Democrats before the vote had said that if Johnson moves aid for Ukraine, we will vote to protect him. He ended up following through with that, putting that foreign aid package on the floor that included roughly $61 billion in aid for Ukraine. And so Democrats said, the Democrats sort of framed it as not really a vote in favor of Mike Johnson, but a vote against Marjorie Taylor Greene, saying that they don't want to they don't want to back someone who they say is from the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party, a chaos agent like Marjorie Taylor Greene. So Democrats have been very careful to message it, not that they're supporting Mike Johnson, but they're opposing Marjorie Taylor Greene.
And do you think there's going to be consequences for the Republicans being perceived as allying in this bipartisan way with Democrats to protect Mike Johnson? I mean, isn't that the narrative that's going to come out of all of this? That Mike Johnson couldn't survive on his own, that he is in some ways the Democrat pick for Speaker?
Well, you'll absolutely hear that argument from Congresswoman Greene, Thomas Massie. We've already heard them saying that this is a Republican speaker propped up by Democrats, that he is actually a Democrat in nature and he needed Democrat support to stay in the position. But I think what we'll see more, where we'll see more punishments perhaps is for Greene, for Massie, and for those Republicans who voted against tabling this resolution. Remember, by and large, the vast majority of Republicans voted against this. They were opposed to ousting Johnson at this moment, even though a number of them have deep frustrations with him and how he's handled various legislative undertakings. They believe that this wasn't the time to oust a speaker. So now we're hearing from some very frustrated Republicans who are saying, well, there should potentially be consequences for Greene, for Massie, and others who went along with this effort. We'll have to see. Look, this vote happened at the end of the day yesterday. Lawmakers have broke from Washington. They don't reconvene until Tuesday of next week, but guarantee that repercussions for Greene, Massie, and others will be a topic of conversation, because a lot of moderates and centrist Republicans are very frustrated that this gambit actually came to the floor.
And Greene was believed previously, or maybe still, to have a very good relationship with Donald Trump. Do you think she's going to be getting a call from him?
No, I don't. There was a statement that Donald Trump put out yesterday. It actually happened to drop a few minutes after the vote had closed. Not great timing there on the part of the former president. But essentially, the statement started out with a resounding endorsement of Congresswoman Greene, saying he's a big fan of hers. She's smart. She's going to be around for a very long time. But saying that this is not the time for the motion to vacate, that Republicans need to show unity ahead of the election and not chaos. And he essentially urged all Republicans to vote in favor of tabling that resolution. So, some could say that the statement was sort of contrasted with each other, the beginning and the end, because Trump is expressing support for Greene. Meanwhile, she is the one who is spearheading this effort that he is urging people to block. But nonetheless, Trump was very, very careful and very clear to give that endorsement to Greene. So I don't know if there's going to be any bad blood there. But then again, the former president was urging very strongly against this.
Mychael Schnell, thank you so much for joining us to fill us in on everything that's been going on. Much appreciated.
Thanks, guys.